I am not entirely sure I like this current setup, but I'm getting ready to move, so things will be different. Hey Kindred! So it's odd because I've been out of the proverbial broom closet on my YouTube channel for a little bit now, and I've been out in real life for quite a bit longer, but I still never imagined talking about being pagan or witchy this openly, especially not in a public forum. And I don't have a problem with that. It's a surprise, because by popular demand, as dictated by polls done on my Twitter and my Patreon and even the community tab here, this is something you guys want to know more about. So without further ado, my name is Kiri Callaghan, and today we're going to talk about grimoires. If you've ever consumed fictional witchy media, whether it's TV or movies, you've likely heard two terms bandied about important books dealing with witchcraft, and that is Book of Shadows and grimoires. And you've probably heard them used fairly interchangeably. These are two books that contain magical spells, rituals, knowledge, resources, etc., etc. But are they the same? Well, not quite. I do know some practitioners who use only one of the two. And as I said before, everyone practices a little differently. So bear that in mind with all of these videos. Nothing I say here or later or before is ever going to be, this is how it is done and it's hard knowledge, because that's just not how the craft works. Hold for plane. A Book of Shadows is essentially your magical journal. It contains your thoughts, some of your research. It's deeply personal to you, and it's rarely shared with anyone else, if at all. If someone does share their Book of Shadows with you, it's most likely because they trust you beyond words. So do not take that as a light thing if someone shares that with you. If you're a solo practitioner, a Book of Shadows alone makes a lot of sense from a practical standpoint. I was mostly a solo practitioner for the past 18, 19-ish years. It's murky. My first interest started when I was like 13, and that is when I did my first ritual, but I didn't really start consistently studying until about 2 years later. Also, despite that I have stuck with it, and surprise, it was not a phase, just like my sexuality, I have a really hard time taking my teenage self seriously. And that's my baggage. That's actually nothing against teenagers. That's my own personal baggage. And probably some self-loathing that I still need to work through with my therapist. I was raised in a very loving, but very Mormon household, and the religion personally never resonated with me. Probably because I was pretty darn gay and hadn't found the words pan-romantic demisexual yet, but the idea of getting married to a man and having babies and a big family and being a caretaker of the home, worst nightmare doesn't really seem to give it the credit that I feel towards that concept. For myself. Other people, like, I have a friend who one of her biggest dreams is to be a mom, and she's so awesome at it, and she's so happy, and she lights up, and that's the thing. Like magic, life decisions. As long as they're not hurting anybody, I don't care. Like, you do you and I'll do me, and let's not impose on each other's lives, because that's where you run into trouble. So when you impose your will onto another person, it's bad in all forms. I was far more interested in my fantasy novels than boys, especially Tamora Pierce's series with Lady Knights. That really should have been a big tip to me. Ah well. And in reading a lot of my fantasy novels, I learned a lot about Celtic mythology and the Fae realm, and something about this felt, I don't know, right? is the word, I guess. We had an all-girls religious camp for preteen and teen girls that we all had to attend every summer. Well, we didn't have to attend it, but you were it was expected of me. Sorry. And I remember wandering away from my classes at church camp, which is actually not this camp's fault. I just can't stand having a schedule while being outdoors. That doesn't make any sense to me. The idea of it's beautiful outside, I'm surrounded by nature, and I have to go to a set schedule of classes where I'm reading from a dusty old book written by a bunch of old men who really didn't give a darn about my gender or any other gender that exists other than their own. Not the point. So I was pretty much like, F that noise, June, and I went off to wander on my own, and sitting alone in the forest, looking out at the lake, just listening to the birds and meditating on the water, was a far more stronger spiritual sensation that I had ever felt in a church or listening to someone's testimony. And something about that serenity and the calming of my anxiety and just realizing, oh no, I'm more connected to this than I've ever been to any concept of God I'd ever heard about. And that's sort of what started me in this conglomerate of things of like between certain mythologies and my connection with outside and nature that sort of started me down this particular path. As for my Book of Shadows, they've never been particularly glamorous, to be honest. I believe my first one was a spiral notebook, partially because that's what I had at hand and I wasn't going to delay my research and going down this path just because I didn't have a book that looked cool enough to me. But also, I was sort of relying on it being inconspicuous because if my parents had found it at the time, I would have been in a heap of trouble. There was a lot of misinformation around the time about this sort of thing. Actually, there's still a lot now. We actually still struggle a lot with fighting against that idea. Popular media still perpetuates it, and it's frustrating. Applying Christian ideals and morality to paganism, or any other religion for that matter, really gets under my skin. Yes, witchcraft is essentially a tool and can be used for a variety of religions, so in that regard, I suppose if you really wanted to, you could use it to worship a Christian idea of evil, but it could also be used to worship Christ himself. I know a few Christian witches. That's a thing. I mean, witchcraft is a tool, and that's it. That's all it is. I'm a pagan witch, and in most paganism, depending how you interpret it, we don't really have a concept of evil. I mean, I suppose we do, but it's like the evil we are personally capable of, not this entity that's trying to beckon you to do evil things specifically so you will fall into darkness and they'll have possession of your soul and yada 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 yada. So in that regard, as I've said before, it is neither good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Magic, even dark magic, is not inherently good or evil. It's how you use it. Despite that my first Book of Shadows was a notebook, it was still consecrated and blessed, and I had even drawn a sigil on the inside page to protect it. I'm going to hammer this home every time we talk about this subject. Magic is about intent. It's not about aesthetic. It doesn't have to look a certain way in order to be effective. Now, don't get me wrong, that added aesthetic can be helpful. Some people might even feel like they really need it because it gets them into the proper mindset. But that's no different than, say, you need a playlist in order to get ready to go out for the night. It gets you in a particular mindset so you can focus in the way that you need to. A Book of Shadows, as your magical journal of sorts, is not just your thoughts, but your findings as you learn about your craft, your dreams even, or a staging space for your ritual work. When I was strictly a solo practitioner, this was all I needed. Or wanted, even. But now, in LA, I have a witchy community. I have a partner who also practices, and it's something I want to share with more people, even people I haven't met yet. But obviously, I don't want to share something as personal and, frankly, as messy as my Book of Shadows. So, I've been starting a Grimoire. I apologize for the very tech producer way I'm about to put this. If your Book of Shadows is your staging environment, then your grimoire is production. Let me illustrate. This is a page that has nothing particularly super personal on it from my most recently filled and finished Book of Shadows. See how scribbled it is? It's my hurried notes. It's from me surrounded by my resource books and jotting down information for a very particular ritual. It's not the prettiest, but its goal is so I can communicate to myself what I need. If I decide I like the ritual and it's something I want to keep and share with others, I put it in our grimoire. This particular ritual is from Samhain. If people are interested next year around Samhain, I can share the actual ritual with you, not perform it, mind you, but walk you through it prior to the holiday so new practitioners can adapt it to their own wants and needs. I treat my grimoire very much like a scrapbook, and you don't have to do it like this. This is a personal choice. I do this because in being more mindful of how I finalize this, I'm also able to work my intention into the pages itself. It's more deliberate. Plus, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, but I have always wanted to have one of those cool looking spell books you see in TV all the time. If I can, I also like to put in little physical representations of spell components, like these dried rose petals. But make sure you secure them in a way that won't damage or smudge. Michael's sells little clear baggies if you want to put something a bit more loose, like anise seeds, but don't want them getting anywhere. Your grimoire is still a sacred object and should be treated with respect, protected and consecrated, but ultimately, it will not contain things like personal thoughts. Information about spells, rituals, how to prepare tools, magical correspondences, that sort of thing. But things that you are willing to share as sort of a general information. Anything I put in my grimoire is something I would share very easily with anyone in my coven or even one of you. If magic was a math problem, a grimoire would be the problem and solution, but none of the work shown in between. If you are a solo practitioner and you want to find a happy medium between scribbled mess and spellbinding scrapbooking, then I suggest, honestly, getting a bullet journal. It's what I'm using for my current Book of Shadows. I just started it not too long ago. The paper is thick, and I'm applying the organization I've learned from my bullet journal to make my Book of Shadows more efficient, but less of a splattering of chaos. But there is nothing wrong with chaos, Kindred. This is your book, after all. Let's say, for instance, this was my Book of Shadows. This is actually just my normal bullet journal. But if I had done, say, some research on a little hearth magic, or even doing things with tea, I could do a still little splash page. And if I was reading about it from certain sources, I would probably skip this bad boy, but go past the habits. But you could do little things like, this could be, hey, I'm reading about this, and this is is my brain dump from that. You could make a playlist if you wanted to. You could jot down, instead of days of the week, like I've done here for me in my bullet journal, you could essentially do this for sources and where you've read these things and all the like. It's sort of limitless. I don't want to show you what I've put in my Book of Shadows, but you can see from what I've done with my normal bullet journal, the options that are available to you if you want to go that route. And it's sort of a nice in-between my scribbled mess and my giant scrapbooking. Which, on that note, you also don't need a grimoire this big! It is the size of my entire torso, and it's pretty impractical, but it's what I wanted. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have always been in love with a giant spellbook aesthetic, and I finally have it, my friends. Plus, the size does lend itself to the whole scrapbook sort of style I'm applying to it. A lot more room. This also means doing a lot of guesswork on where things are going to go. My sabbats are going to be at the front, as you saw, but I'm making tabs for sections for simple rituals, such as cleansing a space or consecrating tools, and another tab will be made for resources like magical correspondences. But as I said, this is all guesswork, and I may be too little or too many pages for a particular section. Who knows? If the idea of doing that makes you anxious, which, trust me, I get it. I actually know a lot of witches who use a binder, and they put all of their pages for their grimoire in protective sheets so they can actually move it around as needed and reorganize. And if you're thinking, ugh, but binders just look like school, there's some really cool stuff you can do to a binder to make it look like really witchy and spooktacular, if you will. But that is a craft for a different time. I also know people who put both their Book of Shadows and their grimoire on their computer. Personally, I like having the tactileness of having it nearby. I don't like having phones near a circle, and while you could print it out, it just feels cumbersome to me. So that's not personally how I like to roll. But again, if you decide that that's what works for you, more freaking power to you. I've had a few people ask about where to get started when it comes to this thing, and that is on my list of videos, I promise. It's just something that will require a lot more research. But if you're interested in green magic, which deals with nature, I firmly recommend this bad boy. She's got a few in the series, but I use this for reference so darn much. It's a nice overview of green magic, though as I've said before, nothing you read will be an end-all be-all of this is how you must practice. But I do believe it's a nice jumping off point. And in the vein of where to get started, if you're a fellow practitioner and you feel comfortable sharing, please leave in the comments below what sort of magic you practice, or what your faith is you use with witchcraft, and how you personally got into figuring out what your path is. Not only will it help me by giving me a diverse point of view with the how to get started video, but it'll also help out your fellows in this community. If you enjoyed this video, please give this an enthusiastic thumbs up and share it with your loved ones. And if there's a particular subject in this category that you'd like to suggest, please let me know, because I am always open to suggestions. If you like the general cut of my gibberish, you can join me on my Patreon. We've got sneak peeks and music downloads, and you get a say on what the next video might be. Until next time, keep on the windy side of care, kindred, and of course, stay curious.